that they are incredibly knowledgeable and very kind human beings. So if you ever have any questions or if you ever need anything during the ride today, please don't be afraid to flag them down. Now, our engineer today is Engineer Scott Rea, but because he is the one operating our locomotive, hopefully we won't be seeing too much of him today. Now, we will, however, be seeing our conductor, Brian Saul, who is in charge of our train, and assisting him is our brakeman, Ian Kaminsky. Now, folks, I know I've been throwing a lot of information at you here this afternoon, so there is just one more thing I'd like to point out. In a few moments, you're going to hear the sound of our train horn blow. This will be your cue to look out on your right side for the Gold Rush Cemetery. It'll be after the second parking lot that we see. Now, this is an official historical site. This is where all of Skagway's earliest residents are buried, so you can find some of Skagway's most prolific characters here, as well as fellow passengers who once crossed from car to car. Now, on that note, folks, sit back, relax, and get ready for our adventure.
Taping us and we're taping them. Huh? I said we're taping them and they're taping us. Now, folks, on our left side here, you can see the mountainside open up, and we have another course created by any rapid kayak. I highly recommend not being the first to try it either. I don't think it'll work out so well for you. Just a few hundred feet above the Skagway River here, folks. Along the mountainside, you can see a road. Now, to all of you, this might look like just any old regular road, but to us who live in Skagway, this is an incredibly sacred and precious gemstone, as it is our only way to leave town. Now, this is the South Klondike Highway. Takes you right into British Columbia here, so you do need your passport to take this highway. Now it takes us all the way up to the capital of the Yukon, called Whitehorse. This mere 2-hour drive is one that all of us who live in Skagway like to take, as it is the closest way we can get to any nail salon, movie theater, hairdresser, McDonald's. You get the gist. It also connects with the Alaska-Canada Highway, so you can drive from Skagway all the way down to the lower 48. In fact, folks, after we arrive to Fraser, you will be hopping off and onto a bus, and you will be taking this highway. Let me just say, it is absolutely gorgeous. Now, contrary to popular belief, there was not an ounce of gold in Skagway. Rather, when the Stampeders arrived at Skagway shores, they realized that they were about to have to take a 600-mile trek northward, all the way up to where the Klondike and Yukon rivers meet, near Dawson City. From there, they could find the Bonanza Creek and pan for gold. Now, from Skagway, there were 2 trails the Stampeders could take to reach those gold fields. They could take the Chilkoot Trail, which started a few miles outside of Skagway, or they could take the White Pass Trail, which started in Skagway and actually followed along the Skagway River here. Now, both of these trails were absolutely grueling and perilous, and it was said that no matter which route you took, you had always wished you'd gone the other way. Now, while the White Pass Trail has long since been lost due to weathering and erosion over the last century, the Chilkoot Trail is still very much open on the Canadian side, and we see hikers from all around the world traveling over to hike this 33-mile portion of the Chilkoot Trail. Would be sadly mistaken, because this, my friends, is our International House of Passports, also known as our U.S. Customs Building. Now, the border is actually 12 miles ahead of us at the White Pass Summit, but we did have to build customs here because of how extreme the weather and terrain can be at those higher elevations. Now, as we pass by, looking below the customs building, you can see the words "On to Alaska" with Buchanan painted onto the rock face. Now, this is a reference to a philanthropist by the name of George Buchanan, who sponsored groups of young boys and girls from Detroit, Michigan, all the way up to Alaska during the Great Depression. Now, after he passed, a group of the participants came back together to paint this slogan onto the rock face in his honor, and it actually predates the customs building by nearly 60 years. of seasonal waterfalls. Now, they come in all shapes and sizes. Wrong. He came to Skagway, surveyed the area, and realized that he was, in fact, in for quite the challenge, but nevertheless persisted. And in just 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, all 110 miles of this railroad was complete. Now that's pretty incredible considering the steep mountainside they had to blast away at. The reason they were able to do this was partially because safety regulations looked a little bit different back in those days, but also because Heaney brought on 35,000 workers to help complete the construction of this railroad. Most of these workers had no prior experience whatsoever in building railroads, but they did want to earn enough money for passage onto the Klondike. Now, they did not have modern machinery like we have today, so they had to hand put all of that blasting powder into the rock themselves. Impressively enough, there were only 35 fatalities that occurred on the job.
Oh, wow.
Now, coming up on our left will be the gravesite of 2 of these railroad construction workers, now known as Black Cross Rock. So folks, keep your eyes down below the tracks by about 50 feet to find a giant mossy covered rock with a small black cross standing directly on top of it. Maurice Dunnan and Al Janot were working on a massive overhang of granite when this rock suddenly came loose and fell on the 2 men, crushing them instantly. Impossible to retrieve the bodies without disturbing their remains, Heaney marked the boulder with a wooden cross to serve as a tribute to these 2 men and the 33 other workers who had passed during construction. So once again, folks, Black Cross Rock on the left.
There it is, right there.
Now, the Klondike Gold Rush was an extraordinary case, not only because of the determination and grit required, but also because its riches had ended up favoring the inexperienced stampeders who had absolutely no idea what they were doing over real established gold prospectors. You see, even after the first claim was made, many old-time prospectors were skeptical of just how much gold would really be in the area. So many of them didn't bother to make the enormous trek up to the Yukon. However, at the very same time, the United States was undergoing a really bad economic depression, leaving a lot of people unemployed. So you can already guess that when newspapers headlined "Gold, Gold, Gold," previous farmers, bank clerks, teachers, dentists, and anyone else who had recently found themselves unemployed caught word of the gold craze and thought to themselves, well, how hard can it really be to pan for a little bit of gold?
Well, the answer to that is extremely difficult, and as the Stampeders began their journey in Skagway, their hopes and dreams for riches eroded into a brutal and desperate quest to survive, and only around 30% of these Stampeders actually made it all the way to the goldfields. Alright folks, I'm going to call this next viewpoint out just a few extra moments early as it's a really neat one. Get those cameras out and ready, as in just a few moments we will have a clearing in the trees on our left, and this will give us a view of the largest waterfall in this entire valley, Bridal Veil Falls. Now this is a section of Bridal Veil that can only be seen from our railroad tracks, and fed by the Carmack Glacier high above, its waters cascade over 5,000 feet to the valley floor. It was said that even the most jaded stampeder along the White Pass Trail couldn't help but stop to admire its beauty. So once again folks, Bridal Veil coming up on the left. Now folks, Bridal Veil Falls did not just get its name at random. A local legend states that simply just touching even a drop of water from Bridal Veil Falls, you'll be bound to meet the love of your life within a year. Well folks, you already know that when I heard about this legend last season, I absolutely had to put it to the test. So I bushwhacked my way down to Bridal Veil Falls and I took a shower in that bad boy. Unfortunately, the only thing that I've learned in the last year is that, well, your odds of finding someone in Skagway are actually really good. Unfortunately, those goods are a little odd. Now folks, we are passing by just a few more clearings in the trees on our left here. And if you look upwards across the valley, you'll begin to see what looks like a road along the mountainside.
Now, what we're looking at, folks, this is not just any road. This is our railroad. We call this the Highline section. It's about 3 miles ahead of us by rail and 700 feet from where we are right now. They can also see our famous wooden trestle bridge up there over the deep chasm of Glacier Gorge, and this will lead us into our first tunnel of the day. Now, yes, folks, we are headed up there, so if you're taking a look at our Highline section feeling a little bit anxious about the height, well, I wouldn't worry about that now. You'll just have to cross that bridge when you get there. Now, folks, if you take a look on the right side, you can see the incredibly dense forest growth that occurs on these granite mountainsides. Now, you can also see that some of their root systems here are completely exposed, and it's pretty incredible that any of these trees can grow at all on these mountainsides, as there is almost no topsoil. Now, a lot of the trees here actually grow their root systems outwards rather than downwards in response to the lack of topsoil, and they actually intertwine their root systems with the trees around them to help all of them thrive on these harsh mountainsides. Also helping these trees stay in place here is a moss by the name of sphagnum moss. You'll find it all throughout Skagway and Southeast Alaska here. It actually is very, very useful. It's been useful for centuries by the Tlingit First Nations who lived in the area. They would use it as band-aids, diapers, and salves for whenever they had injuries. We are approaching the Glacier Station here at milepost 14. This is another popular track stop of the hiking trail, and it's also a staging area for maintenance crews who are out here every single morning and night to make sure that our railroad tracks are in tip-top shape. So you might notice a bit of their equipment on the sides of our tracks. Now, in just a few moments here, we will be making our second crossing over the Skagway River here. And once again, we are going to have beautiful views of the surrounding valley on both sides of our train. us around nearly 180 degrees so that we can make our way up to our highline section. Now this portion of our track is actually our steepest ascent of the day. We are moving upwards roughly at a 3.9% grade, or in other words, roughly 206 feet in elevation for every mile. So you'll quickly see that the mountainside and valley on our left will get quite beneath us. Now folks, make sure to give a few glances out your right window as well, because coming up here we are going to get some gorgeous views of these mountainsides along our high line. You'll see some beautiful box canyons and a few waterfalls cascading down them as well. I think it's a pretty underrated view that often goes missed. To those tracks that we were once on, you can actually see one of our sister trains making its way up to the high line. Now if you look just a few hundred feet above that train, high above, you're going to see some jagged mountain peaks. Now these are called the sawtubes, and they're actually the tallest points that we can see in our mountains today from our train, standing just over 7,000 feet. Now all of these mountains and valleys around us today were created by glacial activity that occurred over tens of thousands of years. Glaciers form at high, cold altitudes when snow gathers much faster than it can melt. The weight of this additional snow compacts itself into glacial ice, and this glacial ice is the most powerful natural source of erosion in the entire world. Now, thousands of years ago, a giant body of ice filled this entire valley. It spanned a mile high and reached 100 miles all the way into the Yukon. It slowly pushed its way towards the inside passage, and as it did, it weighed down the valleys here and scraped against the mountain rock. It wasn't quite high enough to reach the peaks of the sawtooths, and this is why they appear much more jagged than the mountainsides around them. Now folks, there's one more view that I'd like to quickly point out because it may be obscured with cloud coverage here. Looking ahead, roughly at your 10 o'clock, you'll notice a giant patch of white in the mountains there and a little bit of blue and brown coloration. Now what you're looking at is pure ice. That is the Carmack Glacier sitting atop Mount Cleveland. This is actually the very glacier that feeds Bridalveil Falls. So this glacier right here is one very small remnant of that original giant body of ice that filled this valley. Definitely going to want to have your cameras ready for this next view, as it's one of my personal favorites. In just a few moments here, we will be taking our famous wooden trestle bridge over the deep chasm of Glacier Gorge. Right now we are 1,000 feet above the valley floor, so if you are afraid of heights, well, this is the perfect opportunity to really admire that beautiful upholstery in your train cars. But for those of us who are feeling brave, make sure to look out the left side and ahead to get a gorgeous view of our train as it curves along the mountainside, along the wooden trestle bridge, and into our first short and sweet tunnel of the day. Now, folks, on the left side here, you may notice what appears to be some old telephone lines alongside our train tracks. Now, these are actually old telegraph lines that were installed by the U.S. military when they leased our railroad back in the 1940s. The old ways of visually flagging were just too slow to keep up with our high freight demands, so they installed these telegraph lines to make communication much more effective. Nowadays, telegraphing is considered to be just a little bit outdated, so we use handheld radios to communicate with each other. Now, folks, there are a lot of really amazing stories that come from the Klondike Gold Rush. Unfortunately, along with those amazing stories, there are also some stories that were not quite so inspirational or glamorous. The trek to the goldfields was not a kind one, and many of the stampeders who made their way to the goldfields were incredibly inexperienced when it came to outdoor navigation. One of the most gruesome chapters of the gold rush actually takes place down in the bottom of this gulch to our left. At the bottom of this gulch still follows along the Skagway River, which means that the White Pass Trail also existed down there. Now, since the White Pass Trail was much less steep than the Chilkoot Trail, the stampeders thought that they could use pack animals to carry their supplies along this trail in order to make their journey much easier. Unfortunately, many of these stampeders did not know nor cared how to learn to take care of their pack animals properly. And as a result, it was estimated that upwards of 40,000 horses died in this very gulch as a result of exhaustion, poor nutrition, and excessive burden. Many of these horses were abandoned or even killed by their owners, who felt that buying a new horse altogether was simply just cheaper than feeding their animals. It can be easy to get lost in the fun, adventurous stories of the gold rush, but it's also important to remember the hard truth and reality that comes along with them. Milepost 17.5, now known as Dead Horse Gulch, remains an incredibly important reminder of this very tragic chapter in gold rush history. Now, fortunately, when our railroad was completed, the brutal conditions of the White Pass Trail were abandoned. And folks, on a brighter note, seems like we've got a beautiful rainbow up ahead over the deep chasm of Dead Horse Trail. As we make our way around the bend here, coming up on our left will be our famous steel cantilever bridge. Now, standing at 215 feet tall, when this bridge was completed in 1901, it was the tallest rail bridge of its kind in the entire world. Now, folks, I know what you're thinking. This bridge does look just a little bit run down. Now, not to worry here, our new engines can do this very special maneuver. In just a few moments, you will feel our train begin to pick up speed, and that is so we can launch ourselves across this gap. We usually make it over no problem. Now, folks, of course, I am only just kidding. This bridge was retired decades ago, and we do really like you, so we are not going to be taking that bridge. Instead, we will be taking a much newer, much more intact bridge here in a few moments, which will actually give us a beautiful parallel view of the steel cantilever. Now, despite its condition today, this bridge remains an incredible feat of engineering, and it's part of the reason the entirety of the White Pass Railroad, is now designated as an historic international civil engineering landmark. Now, folks, directly after we take this bridge here, we will enter our second tunnel of the day. Now, this tunnel is 3 times longer than our first, so do be prepared for a longer period of darkness. If you're afraid of the dark, well, I highly recommend doing what our engineer does, and just close your eyes. Of distant riches, and the other descending south back through the very pass they had just conquered. Now, why in the world would they be doing that? Well, the gold fields were in a remote environment that could hardly sustain the tens of thousands of stampeders making their way to the gold fields. So, faced with mass starvation, the Canadian government had to intervene. No stampeder bound for the Klondike could cross the border without the necessary food and equipment. Weighing in at almost 2,000 pounds, this rule was infamously named as the 1 ton of goods. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I really don't think that I could carry 2,000 pounds of food on my back, and neither could the stampeders. So instead, they formed teams and had to make dozens of trips along the trail to get all their supplies up to the pass. And sometimes this process could take upwards of 6 months. are quickly approaching the White Pass summit here, which means that in just a few moments we will be crossing the international border into Canada. Now keep your eyes out on the left side. About 15 feet up on the rocky ledge, you'll see the US flag, the Canadian flag, and directly in between them, a small bronze obelisk. This obelisk is the international border marker, so once we cross that, we will officially be in British Columbia. Now directly past this obelisk, lower on the ground, you'll see a row of 5 more flags, signifying the regions that our railroad travels through, and directly behind them, a small wooden cabin. Now this wooden cabin is a replica of the border station used by the Northwest Mounted Police, who stood guard day and night through extreme winter conditions to inspect every stampeder and make sure they had their 1 ton of goods. Away from Skagway. So in reality, their quest had only just begun. Now this body of water to our left here is known as Summit Lake. It's a glacial tarn, meaning that it was out of the bedrock by glacial erosion. At about 4 miles long, this lake reaches 150 feet in depth, and during the wintertime it completely freezes over, thick enough to the point where locals will actually drive up here to snowmobile over it. That we've been traveling through for most of our journey has now transitioned into a desolate, barren landscape. Now, for the remaining 7 miles of our journey here, we will be traveling through a subarctic tundra known as the Tormented Valley. And winter condition pursuit of distant riches, and the other descending south back through the very pass they had just conquered. Now, why in the world would they be doing that? Well, the goldfields were in a remote environment that could hardly sustain the tens of thousands of stampeders making their way to the goldfields. So faced with mass starvation, the Canadian government had to intervene. No stampeder bound for the Klondike could cross the border without the necessary food and equipment. Weighing in at almost 2,000 pounds, this rule was infamously named as the 1 ton of goods. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I really don't think that I could carry 2,000 pounds of food on my back. And neither could the stampeders. So instead, they formed teams and had to make dozens of trips along the trail to get all their supplies up to the pass. And sometimes this process could take upwards of 6 months. Now, folks, we are quickly approaching the White Pass Summit here, which means that in just a few moments, we will be crossing the international border into Canada. Now, keep your eyes out on the left side. About 15 feet up on the rocky ledge, you'll see the U.S. flag, the Canadian flag, and directly in between them, a small bronze obelisk. This obelisk is the international border marker, so once we cross that, we will officially be in British Columbia. Now, directly past this obelisk, lower on the ground, you'll see a row of 5 more flags, signifying the regions that our railroad travels through, and directly behind them, a small wooden cabin. Now, this wooden cabin is a replica of the border station used by the Northwest Mounted Police, who stood guard day and night through extreme winter conditions to inspect every stampeder and make sure they had their 1 ton of goods. Away from Skagway. So in reality, their quest had only just begun. Now, this body of water to our left here is known as Summit Lake. It's a glacial tarn, meaning that it was gouged out of the bedrock by glacial erosion. At about 4 miles long, this lake reaches 150 feet in depth, and during the wintertime, it completely freezes over, thick enough to the point where locals will actually drive up here to snowmobile over it. That we've been traveling through for most of our journey has now transitioned into a desolate, barren landscape. Now, for the remaining 7 miles of our journey here, we will be traveling through a subarctic tundra known as the Tormented Valley. Now, winter condition because it means my tour is over. This is the part where I get to stand up, stretch my legs, and come meet you all in person. This way you can finally, don't worry folks, I will not be leaving the microphone unattended. Your lovely roaming guide and my personal friend Maya will be taking over for me and leading us the rest of the way into Fraser. Now please don't be offended if I rush right past some of you at first. I'm just making my way to the front of the train so that I can turn around and double back through each car. When I do, please feel free to hand me any comment card you may have filled out or ask me any last minute questions. So without further ado, here is Maya, and I will see you all very soon.
Hello everybody, this is Maya taking over the mic for your lovely narrator and my best friend Emily. While she makes her way up to the very front of the train, I would like to take this opportunity to tell you all just a little bit more about your awesome tour guide today. Emily comes to us all the way from Washington State, and this is her second year here at White Pass. In her off time, Emily enjoys cuddling with her cats and teaching interpretive dance classes. Feel free to ask Emily any last minute questions as she visits your car. And if you enjoyed Emily's tour today and you were hoping for a chance to show your appreciation, this will be your opportunity to thank your tour guides.